Nothing happened to you by accident. This is not a comfortable thing to hear at first because the accidents were costly, some of them devastatingly so, and the idea that they were planned carries with it a weight that the comfortable version of spiritual reassurance usually tries to avoid. The comfortable version says everything happens for a reason, which is technically the same claim but is said in a way that keeps the reason vague and the planning at a distance. What is being said here is more specific and more complete and more costly to receive fully. Not that there was a reason somewhere in the background. That it was planned, deliberately, with the full knowledge of what the planning would cost you and the living of it. That the cost was not an unfortunate side effect of a plan that would have worked better without it. The cost was part of the plan, required by the plan, the specific instrument through which the plan produced what the plan was designed to produce. Everything that hurt you was planned, everything that seemed to go wrong, everything that dissolved when it should have held, that closed when it should have opened, that arrived late or not at all or in a form so different from what you needed that the gap between the arrival and the need felt like a failure of everything you had been told about how things work. All of it was planned. Not by a force indifferent to your suffering, that is not the kind of planning this is. By a force that knew exactly what the suffering would cost and designed the plan to include it anyway because the plan could not produce what it was designed to produce without the specific refinement that the specific suffering was the only available mechanism for. The plan was not cruel. The plan was precise. And precision. In the domain of building human souls into what they are capable of becoming, requires the same quality that precision requires in every other domain of construction. It requires the right conditions, the right pressure, the right temperature, the right duration, not comfortable conditions, the right ones, the conditions that produce the specific result rather than an approximation of it. The conditions that build what is being built rather than what would be more comfortable to build. You were built by the plan's conditions. Everything the plan required to produce what you are is in you now, completely, as the substance of what the years made. And you are ready. The plan was always moving toward readiness. The readiness has arrived. Write 111. In the comments right now if something in you released when you read the word planned. If the specific relief of finding out that the chaos was not chaos, that the years of apparent randomness and apparent failure and apparent abandonment were not any of those things but were the precise execution of something that understood exactly what it was doing, landed in you as the thing you have needed to hear longer than you have been able to admit. To understand what was planned you have to start at the beginning. Not your beginning, the beginning of what the plan was designed to produce. Because the plan began before you did. Before the specific life you are living was in the world. What the plan was working toward was already understood. The outcome was known. The person you would need to become to serve the specific purpose the plan was building you toward was already seen in its completed form. And everything that was arranged, the family you were born into, the early experiences that formed the initial shape of your interiority, the first losses and the first knowings and the first encounters with the gap between what you sensed the world could be and what the world was actually offering, all of it was arranged with the completed form in mind. This is the hardest piece to hold without collapsing it into something smaller. The impulse when this kind of claim is made is to ask, planned by whom? To demand the identification of the planner before accepting the claim of the planning. This demand is understandable but it misses the point. The planning is not dependent on your ability to name the planner. The evidence of the planning is in the pattern, in the specific, consistent, precisely calibrated quality of how the events of your life fit together when you look at the full arc rather than any individual section. When you look at the arc, the pattern is visible in a way it cannot be attributed to accident, the specific sequence of what came first and what came second and why each prepared for the next. The alternation of difficulty and opening, of pressure and release, of the application of conditions that built something and then the withdrawal of conditions to allow what was built to consolidate before the next building began. The plan shows in the arc. And the arc, when you look at it from where you are now, with the full span of it available to you, from the beginning through the difficult middle and into the arrival at where you are, shows a coherence that accident cannot produce, a coherence that has a direction, a coherence that arrives somewhere, at you, as you are now, at the specific combination of what was built and what was refined and what was clarified and what was stripped away until what remained was the essential thing. The plan arrived at you. The early chapters were foundations. You may not have understood them as foundations at the time, almost no one does. And the plan does not generally announce itself as a plan during the foundational chapters, because the announcement would interfere with the building. Foundations are built in conditions of not knowing. The knowing comes later. The knowing comes when the building is far enough along that the purpose of the foundation is visible in what it is supporting. What was being laid in the early chapters of your life was the specific quality of interior orientation that everything that came after depended on. The earliest experiences, the ones you carried from before you had adequate language for them, the ones that shaped how you related to yourself and to others and to the question of what you could trust in a world that was already, at that early stage, teaching you things about itself. Those experiences were not random. They were selecting for something, creating the conditions for a specific kind of interior development, the conditions that would produce, in the specific person you were going to be, the specific quality of interiority that the full plan required. The conditions were not gentle in most cases. The plan almost never uses gentle conditions for foundational building because gentle conditions do not produce the quality of depth that the later chapters require. Gentle conditions produce pleasant surfaces. The plan was not interested in pleasant surfaces. It was interested in depth, in the specific quality of interior that only develops in contact with genuine difficulty early enough that the difficulty becomes formative rather than simply experienced. That is integrated into the structure of who you are rather than added as a layer of experience on top of a structure that was formed differently. You integrated the early difficulty, something in you, at an age when most of the integration happened below the threshold of conscious choice, took the early conditions and built them into the interior architecture rather than keeping them as external experiences to manage and survive. This was the first piece of evidence that the plan was working as designed, that the person the plan was building was capable of doing what the plan required them to do, of taking difficulty and making it substance rather than wound, of integrating what was hard rather than defending against it, of arriving at interiority through the early conditions rather than arriving at defended surfaces. The foundation was deep, everything that came later was built on it. The middle chapters were refinement. This is the period that is most difficult to look at clearly and to hold with the understanding that the looking is now able to provide, because the middle chapters are the ones most associated with cost, with the years when the gap was widest and the certainty was most unsupported and the question of whether the plan was real or whether there was no plan at all was at its most acute. The middle chapters are where most people's experience of their life is most organized around survival rather than building, around enduring rather than becoming, around getting through rather than arriving somewhere. But the middle chapters were the most intense building period, not the most productive in terms of visible output. The middle chapters of a plan like this rarely produce visible output that corresponds to what the building is actually doing. The visible output is constrained precisely because the building requires the constraint, requires the compression, requires the specific conditions of limited outlet and sustained pressure and the ongoing exercise of carrying without confirming that produces in the interior of the person being built, the qualities that the later chapters are going to require. The plan was building your endurance, not the generic endurance of someone who learns to tolerate discomfort. The specific endurance of someone who can carry the full weight of what they carry through conditions specifically designed to make the carrying impossible, and who does not set it down, who does not, in the years of the most sustained pressure, trade what they carry for the relief of having nothing heavy to carry, who maintains the interior compass through everything the middle chapters apply to the situation and arrives at the end of those chapters with the compass intact and the orientation true. This endurance is not something you chose in any single moment. It is the product of 1,000 small choices made in the ordinary moments of ordinary days across the years of the middle chapters. The choices so small they rarely registered as choices at all. The choice, in the moment when setting something down would have been available, to keep carrying. The choice, in the moment when the alternative orientation would have been more comfortable, to maintain the true one. The choice, again and again, in the specific unremarkable moments that nobody witnesses and nobody validates and nobody even knows about, the choice to remain. Each choice compounded into the next. Each compounding produced more of the endurance the later chapters require. The plan was counting on your making those choices, had designed the middle chapters with the knowledge that you would. And you did. You made every choice the plan required, in the specific moments, in the specific form, at the specific cost that was called for. The middle chapters did their work because you let them. There was a point in the middle chapters, you know which one. There is a specific period in the arc of your life that occupies this specific position, when the plan introduced a condition that was unlike the others, unlike the sustained pressure and the managed constraint and the ongoing friction. This condition had a different quality. It was more acute, more specific, more targeted at the particular place in you that was the most essential to the final form the plan was building toward. It was the point of maximum questioning, the period when the why had the least available answer, when the interior compass was pointing toward something you could not see and the available evidence was pointing in a different direction, and the cost of maintaining the interior orientation over the available evidence was at its highest point across the entire middle period. The point when the question of whether the plan was real or whether there was no plan, whether the certainty you were carrying was genuine orientation or elaborate self-consolation, was the sharpest it had ever been. The plan put you there on purpose. The maximum questioning was not a failure of the plan, it was the most critical phase of it, because the quality of the interiority that the plan was building toward required a specific test that only the maximum questioning could provide. Not the test of whether you could endure the questioning, though the endurance was real and essential. The test of what the questioning revealed when it was at its sharpest. Of what was in you at the level below the certainty that was being questioned. Of whether, when the certainty was stripped of all its comfortable supporting structures and held against the full force of the available evidence in its opposite direction, something remained. Something remained. It always remains in the people the plan builds for what the plan builds them for. The something that remains is not the certainty itself. The certainty was what was being questioned and what the questioning was designed to challenge. What remains is the thing underneath the certainty, the thing that the certainty was always resting on, the direct, unmediated, not dependent on argument contact with what is real that lives at the very bottom of the interior of a person who has been genuinely built rather than simply trained. You found it at the bottom of the maximum questioning, found it in the way that you find things that were always there but that you only gain access to when everything on top of them has been stripped away by conditions designed to strip. What you found at the bottom is what the plan was building the entire middle period to reveal, what the maximum questioning was designed to expose by removing everything that was not it. The real thing. The thing that the certainty was pointing toward all along and that the plan needed you to contact directly, not through the mediation of the certainty, before the later chapters could begin. The maximum questioning produced the direct contact. The direct contact is what you carry now, not the certainty about something real. The direct contact with the real thing itself. That is why the plan required the maximum questioning. Not as punishment, as the specific instrument of the specific access the later chapters require. Subscribe now if you can feel, reading this, that the arc that is being described is your arc, that the specific sequence, foundation, refinement, maximum questioning, direct contact, is the sequence of your life when you look at it from here. This channel is the space where the full arc is named and the full meaning of each chapter is held clearly, where the plan is treated as the intelligent and precise and purposeful thing it is rather than as the vague comfort of everything happens for a reason. Stay inside this. The full account is still unfolding. The later chapters, the ones that begin with the arrival of the direct contact, the ones that begin where you are now, were always the purpose of the plan. The foundation and the refinement and the maximum questioning were all in service of this, of you as you are now, carrying what the years built, in the world that is now receiving what you carry, doing the specific thing that the specific combination of everything the plan produced in you and through you is precisely designed to do. The later chapters do not have the quality of the middle chapters. This is the most important thing to understand about where you are and what comes next, because the middle chapters were so comprehensively the experience of the arc that they produced, in you, an orientation that was adapted to their quality, an orientation that expected sustained pressure, managed constraint, the gap between interior knowing and exterior confirmation. An orientation that braced for difficulty as the default condition of moving through the world. The later chapters are the opposite of that default. The later chapters are what the earlier chapters were producing the conditions for. The later chapters are when the plan's purpose becomes visible in the texture of daily experience rather than only in the retrospective understanding of what the earlier chapters were doing. When the things that were being built toward begin to arrive. When the direction the compass has always pointed toward becomes the direction things are actually moving. When the endurance that was the primary quality required during the middle period is supplemented, not replaced, not discarded, but supplemented, by the specific quality that the later chapters call for. The quality of receiving what the earlier chapters built toward. Of allowing the arrival of what was always coming to actually arrive in the full form it was always going to arrive in. The plan was always going to arrive here. Everything the plan did in the earlier chapters was organized around this. Around you being ready, around the world being in the state it is in, which is a state of genuine need for what you carry. Around the convergence of your readiness and the world's need being the specific convergence the later chapters exist to express. The convergence is now. The later chapters begin now. The plan has arrived at its own purpose and is now expressing that purpose through the full, unmanaged, uncontained version of what it spent all the earlier chapters building. There is something specific about the word plan that needs to be held in its full meaning before the understanding of the plan can be complete. The planning was not only about what happened to you, it was also about what you would do with what happened to you. The plan knew both, knew the events it was going to introduce and knew, in the way that things that know what they are building for always know, what you were going to do in response to each event. The plan was built around the knowledge that you would make the choices you made, that you would maintain the orientation, that you would not take the easier path when the easier path was the more comfortable option, that you would arrive at the direct contact rather than stopping at the managed certainty, that you would be ready. This is not a statement that you had no choice. You had choice at every point. The plan could have been derailed. The choices that maintained the orientation could have gone the other way. The middle period could have produced a different outcome, not the outcome the plan was working toward but a different outcome, one in which the difficulty produced the usual result, which is some version of the decoupling, some agreement with the performance as the primary mode, some trading of the genuine thing for the relief of carrying something lighter. You made the choices that kept the plan on track, not because you were compelled to, because you were the specific kind of person who makes those choices. The plan built you partly to be the person who makes those choices, and the choices you made confirmed that the building had worked, and the confirmation that the building had worked was the basis on which the plan could proceed to the next phase, which required the preceding phase to have produced what it was designed to produce. The cooperation between the plan and your choices is what made the plan a plan rather than an imposition. The plan did not override your freedom to choose. It offered conditions that, given who you are, would reliably produce the choices that the plan required. And the offering was the plan trusting what it had built, trusting that the specific interior it had produced in you, through the foundation and the refinement, and the maximum questioning, was the specific interior that would make the right choices in the right moments, not because the choices were forced but because the interior was the kind of interior that gravitates toward those choices naturally, that finds the maintaining of the genuine thing more essential than any comfort the alternative could provide. You are the person the plan trusted. That trust was placed based on the specific evidence of what the earlier chapters produced in you. And the trust was vindicated. You are here. The plan is at its purpose. The trust proved justified. Write 222 in the comments right now if feeling the plan is something that trusted you changes how you hold the entirety of what you went through. If the shift from understanding the years as something that happened to you to understanding them as something that was trusting you to do what you did changes the weight of the carrying. Because that shift is available right now, and taking it changes everything about how you stand in relation to your own past. The specific things that were planned include several that you would not have chosen to include if you had been the one doing the planning. This is worth acknowledging directly, because glossing over the most difficult pieces of the plan with the comfort of the larger meaning is a form of dishonesty that prevents the full reception of what the plan actually was. The things that cost you most were planned, named clearly and held completely, not just the difficult chapters as a category, the specific losses, the specific relationships that ended in the specific ways they ended, the specific opportunities that dissolved, the specific periods when what you needed most was most completely absent. Those were planned, in the specific form they took, at the specific timing in your arc, producing the specific effects in you that the plan required them to produce. The loss of the relationship that ended when it ended, in the way it ended, at that point in your development, that was not random. That relationship ending at that moment produced something in you that the later chapters require and that would not have been produced if the relationship had continued, or ended differently, or ended at a different time. The plan needed what the specific ending produced. The specific ending was planned. The opportunity that dissolved when dissolving felt most devastating, the one that your life would have moved in a fundamentally different direction if it had materialized, that dissolution was planned. The direction your life would have moved if the opportunity had materialized was not the direction the plan was building toward. The dissolution was the plan protecting the trajectory, keeping you moving toward what the plan was building you toward rather than toward what would have been easier to reach but would have landed you somewhere other than here. Here is where the plan was going. Here is where everything was pointing. Here is what the loss of the relationship and the dissolution of the opportunity and the maximum questioning and the entire arc of the foundation and refinement were all converging toward. You, as you are, carrying what the plan built, ready for what the later chapters are going to express. The cost was the price of the specific destination, and the specific destination, this, here, what you are and what you carry and what is now available to you and through you, was worth what the cost was, not as a comfort, as an accurate accounting. The cost produced what is here. What is here is worth the cost. This is not the comfortable version of the reassurance. This is the honest version. The people who appeared in your life at specific moments were planned. This is the piece of the larger claim that is most personally significant and most difficult to hold without it becoming either too large or too small. Too large in the direction of deciding that every person who has ever been in your life was a deliberately placed element of the plan, which is more than the evidence supports and more than needs to be true for the plan to be real. Too small in the direction of dismissing the specific pattern that is visible when you look at the arc of who arrived and when and what the arrival produced. The pattern is real. The people who arrived at the moments of maximum significance in your arc, at the moments of transition, at the hinges between chapters, at the specific junctures when what was needed was what they carried, were not random arrivals. They appeared because the plan required their appearance at that specific moment to produce the specific effect their appearance produced. Some of them were people who gave you something essential, something you needed in order to continue moving through the middle chapters in the direction the plan was building toward. Something that arrived in the form of a specific person rather than a teaching or an event because what was needed could only come through a person. Through the specific quality of encounter between their particular interior and yours. Some of them were people who took something from you, not in the malicious sense, though some of the taking felt malicious and some of it was genuinely painful. In the planned sense, they appeared to remove something from your life that the plan needed removed in order for the building to continue in the direction it was going. The relationship that ended and took with it a version of yourself that would have prevented the next version from forming. The friendship that dissolved and took with it a form of belonging that was keeping you inside the old chapter when the plan needed you in the next one. The person who created the specific circumstance of loss that turned out to be the specific circumstance of liberation. The loss that felt like the end of something and was the end of something. And that the ending was what the plan required. Both kinds of people were necessary. Both kinds of arrival were planned. The ones who gave and the ones who took were both serving the plan's purpose, which was your becoming what the later chapters require. The ones who took were not failures of the plan. They were the plan's most precise instruments in some cases, the most exact mechanism for removing what needed to be removed, which could not have been removed any other way, by any gentler means, without also removing something essential that the plan needed to keep. You can hold all of them differently now, not without grief. The grief that belongs to the losses is real and appropriate, and the plan does not require you to release the grief before understanding the purpose. Grief and understanding can coexist, but differently, with the specific quality of understanding that changes the meaning of the encounter without changing the reality of the cost. The cost was real and it was planned, and both things are true simultaneously, and holding both without collapsing either one into the other is the most complete way to hold what happened. The timing of everything was planned. This is the piece that answers the question you have asked the most times across the most years of the middle chapters, in the most variations of phrasing but always the same essential question: why not sooner? Why did what needed to come not come sooner? Why did the relief, the arrival, the opening, the confirmation, why did all of it come when it came rather than earlier, when you needed it earlier? When the cost of waiting was highest and the support was most absent and the question of whether the waiting had a purpose was most acute. The timing was the plan's most precise instrument, more precise than the events themselves in some ways, because the events without their specific timing would not have produced what they produced. The same event arriving at a different moment in the arc produces a different interior result. The difficulty that arrives before the foundation is deep enough to integrate it produces wound rather than substance. The opening that arrives before the refinement is complete enough to receive it produces premature expression that does not have the depth the later chapters require. The confirmation that arrives before the maximum questioning has run its course produces certainty that has not been tested at the level that the plan needs the certainty tested. The timing was always calibrated to what you were ready for, not comfortable with, ready for. The distinction is essential. Comfort was never the plan's measure of the right moment. Readiness was. And readiness is a quality of the interior that has no relationship to comfort. People are frequently ready for things that they are not comfortable with and comfortable with things they are not ready for. The plan used the interior measure, not the comfort measure, and the interior measure, applied precisely, produced the timing that produced you as you are. Everything arrived when it arrived because you were ready for it when you were ready for it and not before. The years of the middle period were the years of building the readiness that each arrival required. The plan did not withhold the arrivals out of indifference to the cost of the waiting. It held them at the appropriate distance until the interior was prepared to receive them in the form they needed to be received in. Released them at the specific moment when the interior preparation had reached the point where the reception would be complete rather than partial. When what arrived would land fully rather than landing at the surface of a person who was not yet built deep enough to receive it at the depth it was being given. The arrivals that came too late from the perspective of the experience of the waiting came at exactly the right time from the perspective of the plan. That shift in perspective, from the experience of the waiting to the perspective of the plan, is available to you now in a way it was not available during the waiting. Because the plan is now visible to you in the arc that looking backward from here makes visible. And the visibility of the plan makes the timing of each arrival legible in a way that the experience of the waiting never allowed. Everything arrived when it was ready to be received, including this, including now. There is one more thing that was planned that carries a specific significance for how you understand the version of yourself that is here now. The struggle you had with yourself was planned, not only the external difficulty, the circumstances and the losses and the friction, but the interior struggle, the doubt, the specific recurring question of whether what you were carrying was real or whether you were deceiving yourself with a consoling narrative, the moments of near capitulation, the periods when the management orientation seemed genuinely more sustainable than the orientation of the genuine thing. The times when the weight of the unsupported certainty came closest to being simply too much. Those were planned too, because the plan needed to test not only whether you could carry the certainty under external pressure, but whether you could maintain the orientation against your own doubt. External pressure is one form of the challenge the later chapters require you to be equipped for. Internal pressure is another. The doubt was the internal form. The plan introduced conditions that activated the doubt at its most intense. Precisely because the later chapters require a quality of interior that has been tested by both. A quality of orientation that was maintained not only when the external was applying maximum pressure but also when the internal was generating maximum doubt. The maintenance of the genuine thing in the presence of your own doubt is the hardest version of the maintenance. Harder in some ways than the external pressure because external pressure can be identified and located and understood as something coming from outside. Doubt comes from inside. Doubt speaks in your own voice. Doubt uses your own logic and your own history and your own most honest assessment of your own evidence. Doubt is difficult to resist because resisting it feels like resisting yourself. Like denying something your own intelligence is concluding, like insisting on a belief in the face of your own best thinking skepticism. You resisted it, not perfectly. There were periods when the doubt was winning and you know which periods those were and what they cost. but in the final accounting, at the level that the plan was measuring, you maintained the genuine orientation held through the doubt at its most intense. The internal compass maintained its direction against the most sophisticated challenge it faced, the challenge of your own sincere questioning of whether it was pointing true. That maintenance is among the most significant things the plan produced in you, because the later chapters require it. The later chapters are going to introduce situations in which your own intelligence is going to generate doubt about what you carry and what you are doing with it. The doubt will not always be external challenge that you can identify and resist clearly. Sometimes it will be your own honest assessment of what you observe, and the quality of interior that can maintain the genuine orientation in the face of that kind of doubt. The doubt that is not fear or weakness but genuine intelligence raising genuine questions, is the quality that the maximum questioning was building, the quality you now have. The plan continues. This is the final thing to hold about what the plan is and what it means that everything was planned. The plan is not completed in the sense of having finished and now standing back from its finished product. The plan is completed in the sense of having arrived at the phase that was always the purpose, the phase in which the plan's full expression is underway. The later chapters are the plan expressing itself through you rather than the plan building you for later expression. This means that what happens now is also planned. The specific encounters that are coming, the specific people whose lives are going to be changed by what you carry. The specific moments in which the genuine thing that you carry is going to meet the genuine reaching of a person who has been reaching for it. The specific forms in which the later chapters are going to express themselves in the visible dimensions of your life. All of it is within the plan. All of it is organized around the same intelligence that organized the earlier chapters. All of it is moving toward outcomes that are as specific and as purposeful as the outcomes the earlier chapters were moving toward. You are not navigating the later chapters alone with what the earlier chapters gave you. You are navigating them within the same plan that produced you. The plan that was operating in the earlier chapters is the same plan operating now. The same intelligence, the same precision. The same knowledge of what you carry and what it is for and what the people who need from it and how the encounters will unfold and what each encounter will produce. The plan has not handed you the keys and stepped away. It has arrived at the phase where you are the primary expression of it, where the plan and your full expression of what the plan built are the same movement. Move with the plan, not by trying to discern it in advance. The plan does not generally announce its next steps in forms that can be read in advance, because the reading in advance would interfere with the quality of presence the next step requires. Move with it by being fully what you are in each moment, by bringing what you carry to each encounter without the management and the reduction that the earlier chapters required, by trusting the plan in the later chapters the way you trusted it in the earlier ones. Not with certainty about specific outcomes, but with the orientation toward the genuine thing that the plan has always rewarded, with the interior compass maintained, with the real version brought to every moment rather than the performed version. The plan knows where it is going. You have always trusted it enough to follow. That trust, maintained through everything the earlier chapters required it to be maintained through, is what brought you here. The same trust, expressed in the later chapters as full expression rather than as endurance, is what takes you into the full scope of what the plan was always building toward. Everything was planned, including this, including the specific arrival of these words in your specific reading of them at this specific point in your arc, including the quality of what moves in you as you read them, including the recognition that is landing now. Including what the landing is going to produce in the life you move through beginning with the next moment. Including the next moment. Click on the video on your screen now. What comes next in this series is the account of how the later chapters feel from the inside, how the plan's expression through you rather than the plan's building of you is different in texture and different in demand and different in the quality of what it asks from you versus what the earlier chapters asked. The map for moving through what has been planned for the later chapters. Click on it. The plan continues.